Ruthless billionaire CEO leaves cancer-stricken wife for secretary, her twin children inherit his empire. Renee. His voice cracks slightly. What are you doing here? She steps forward, her heels clicking purposefully on the polished floor. I'm here in my capacity as majority shareholder of Hayes Architectural Group. Effective immediately, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in current management. The woman beside Julian, young, beautiful, with an engagement ring catching the light, scoffs. That's impossible. You have no standing here. Renee's smile is razor-thin as she places a leather portfolio on the table. Actually, I control 43% of Hayes Architectural shares. Combined with proxy votes from your other victims, I have more than enough authority. Julian's eyes widen as he flips through the documents. How? How is this possible? You taught me well, Julian, Renee says, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. You showed me that in business, sentiment is weakness. That power is the only currency that matters. What do you want? He asks, desperation edging into his voice. Money? Revenge? You've destroyed everything I built. I haven't destroyed anything. I've simply taken what should have been ours and made it mine. Renee's gaze hardens. I'm here to build something worthy of my children. Children? The word hits him like a physical blow. What children? Your children, Julian. The twins you'll never know because you chose an empire over a family. Welcome to Heartstrings Stories, where we explore the human capacity for resilience, redemption, and triumph. I'm your storyteller, and before we dive into today's powerful story of betrayal and rebirth, let's take a moment to center ourselves with a brief prayer. Heavenly Father, bless everyone watching this video today. Grant them wisdom to recognize what truly matters in life. Comfort those facing betrayal or illness, and inspire those needing courage to rebuild. May this story touch hearts and change lives. Amen. Have you ever wondered what you would do if the person who promised to stand by you abandoned you at your darkest hour? How far would you go to create justice from injustice? Today's story explores one woman's extraordinary journey from betrayal to triumph that will shake you to your core. If you believe that true strength is revealed when we're tested at our limits, hit the like button right now, because what you're about to hear will remind you that sometimes the most beautiful rebuilding happens after complete devastation. The glass spire of Hayes Architectural Group dominated the San Francisco skyline, cutting through the morning fog like a crystal dagger. Inside her corner office on the 38th floor, Renee Morgan ran her fingers across the blueprint spread before her. The seaside resort would soon become the crown jewel of their Pacific Rim collection. Her designs had transformed a simple beachfront property into an architectural marvel that seemed to float between sea and sky. It's extraordinary, Julian said, his voice warm against her ear as he leaned over her shoulder. Nobody sees space the way you do. The subtle scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something uniquely him, surrounded her as Renee turned to find herself staring into Julian's stormy blue eyes. At 38, Julian Hayes carried his success like a second skin. His confidence came from transforming a modest family architectural firm into a global empire worth billions. We make a good team, she said simply, because it was true. Julian's fingers brushed against hers as he traced the curved glass facade in her design. This will change everything for us in Asia. The Singapore investors are already talking about 3 more projects based on the preliminary sketches alone. Just make sure they understand that the sustainability elements aren't optional decorations. The living walls and water reclamation systems are integral to the design. Julian laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Always the idealist. That's why we work so well together. You dream, I sell, and together we build. Speaking of building, Renee said, glancing at her watch, we should head home. The contractor is coming to finalize the plans for our rooftop garden tomorrow morning. Their penthouse overlooking the bay was undergoing yet another transformation, their 3rd renovation in as many years. Julian was always pushing forward, always seeking the next improvement, the next expansion. You go ahead. I need to review the Tokyo proposals before tomorrow's call. Julian was already turning back to his desk, his mind shifting to the next conquest. Don't be too late, Renee said, planting a quick kiss on his cheek. We're supposed to be designing a life together, not just buildings. Julian caught her hand and pulled her back for a proper kiss. I won't be long. Promise. It wasn't a promise he would keep. It never was. Their courtship had been unexpected. Renee had been 30 when she joined Hayes Architectural as a brilliant but unproven designer fresh from winning the prestigious Bennett Prize for Innovative Sustainable Design. She'd expected to quietly establish herself through hard work and creativity. She hadn't expected to catch the attention of the CEO himself. Julian had noticed her immediately. Not just her talent, which was exceptional, but her passion. The way she fought for her environmental elements even when they complicated construction or added costs. The way she stood her ground in meetings full of men twice her age, articulating her vision without apology. Your water reclamation system would add 8% to the construction budget, he'd pointed out after her first major presentation. And reduce operating costs by 22% over 5 years, she'd countered without missing a beat. While earning triple LEED certification and positioning Hayes as a pioneer in true sustainable luxury. He'd smiled then, that disarming smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. Have dinner with me. Excuse me. Dinner. To discuss your vision for sustainable luxury. I want to hear more. She should have said no. Office romances were complicated enough without involving the CEO. But something in his eyes, a recognition, as if he'd found something he'd been searching for, made her say yes. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant overlooking the bay. They talked for hours, not about office politics or industry gossip, but about transforming skylines, about buildings that could heal environments instead of harming them, about leaving legacies in steel and glass and living gardens. Most people see architecture as frozen art, Julian said, refilling her wine glass. But you see it as a living thing. Something that breathes and grows with its environment. Isn't that how you see it too? She asked. He considered this, twirling the stem of his glass between his fingers. I see it as power made visible. The ability to transform nothing into something monumental. To leave a mark that outlasts us. That sounds lonely, she observed. Building monuments to yourself. It was, he admitted, his voice softening. Until now. That night, standing on the moonlit deck of his sailboat, Julian kissed her for the first time. It felt inevitable, like gravity, two objects meant to collide. Build with me, he whispered against her lips. Not just buildings, but a legacy. Something that combines your vision and my ambition. 6 months later, he proposed on a private beach in Maui as the sun melted into the horizon. The ring was a perfect emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller emeralds that matched her eyes. You've changed everything for me, Renee, he said, kneeling in the sand. I used to build to prove something. Now I want to build to create something that matters. With you. Their wedding at the Legion of Honor Museum overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge was featured in Architectural Digest. The ceremony took place in the courtyard, reimagined by Renee with hanging gardens and flowing water features that transformed the classical space into something magical and modern. During their honeymoon across Europe, they sketched dream projects on hotel stationery, a floating community in Amsterdam, a cliffside cultural center in Santorini, a forest-integrated tech campus outside Berlin. They returned to San Francisco as the golden couple of the architectural world, their combined creativity producing designs that won international acclaim. The Hayes Morgan signature became synonymous with innovative luxury. Projects that seamlessly integrated cutting-edge sustainability with breathtaking beauty. For 3 years, they were unstoppable. Renee's innovative designs complemented by Julian's business acumen and connections. Hayes Architectural Group expanded to Tokyo, Dubai, London. Their residential and commercial projects redefined modern urban spaces. "We're changing the way the world builds," Julian would say during interviews, his arm always around René's waist. "Together, we're creating the future." René believed him completely. They were partners in every sense, creating together, building together, dreaming together. When Julian decided to take the company public to fund further expansion, René supported him. When he pushed for a more aggressive approach in Asian markets, she trusted his business instincts. The first hairline fracture appeared during the Melbourne project presentation. René had been feeling unusually tired, her concentration wavering during meetings. She attributed it to stress, to the 60-hour workweeks and transcontinental flights. "The cantilevered section needs additional support here," said René, pointing to the blueprint spread across the conference table. The room suddenly tilted, voices becoming distant and muffled. "René?" Julian's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Are you all right?" She gripped the edge of the table, willing the room to stop spinning. "I'm fine. Just a little dizzy." Later that evening, Julian found her asleep at her desk, design sketches scattered around her. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, gently shaking her awake. "Take the weekend off. You seem distracted. The Singapore presentation is Monday. I need to finish the renderings. Vanessa can handle it. She's been eager to take on more responsibility." "Vanessa?" René frowned. "The new associate from RSD. She's barely been with the firm 6 months. And she's already impressing everyone. Reminds me of you when you first started, hungry, brilliant, willing to work all hours." What Julian didn't see, or chose not to, were the bruises blooming like dark flowers on her skin. The nosebleeds that wouldn't stop. The bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. René caught glimpses of these changes in mirrors and windows, but dismissed them as overwork, as stress, as the natural toll of building an empire. Until she couldn't ignore them anymore. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning in Dr. Eleanor Fitzgerald's softly lit office. Acute myeloid leukemia. "With immediate treatment, your prognosis is good," Dr. Fitzgerald said gently, her kind eyes fixed on René's face. "But this is aggressive, René. We need to start chemotherapy this week." "This week?" René repeated, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "Cancer. Chemotherapy." These were terms from medical dramas, not her life. Not when Hayes Architectural was on the verge of their biggest international expansion. Not when Julian needed her. "The sooner we begin, the better your chances, Dr. Fitzgerald explained, sliding a folder of information across her desk. "I've outlined the treatment protocol here. We'll start with intensive chemotherapy followed by—" "How long?" René interrupted. "How long will the treatment take?" "The initial phase is typically 6 to 8 weeks. Depending on how you respond, we may need additional cycles." 6 to 8 weeks. The Singapore project would be well underway by then. The Dubai complex would be breaking ground. The Tokyo Tower would be finalizing permits. And after treatment? Recovery time. Dr. Fitzgerald's expression softened with understanding. "René, you need to prepare yourself. This isn't going to be a quick process. Even after treatment, your immune system will be compromised. Full recovery could take 6 months to a year." A year. The thought landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with implications. A year of not being in the office. A year of not traveling to sites. A year of not being the partner Julian needed. "Can I work during treatment?" she asked. Some patients maintain limited work schedules, but the intensive chemotherapy we're recommending will likely make that difficult. Your energy will be severely compromised, and your immune system will be vulnerable to infection. Working in a high-stress environment would not be advisable. René nodded, her mind already calculating how to minimize the disruption to the firm. To Julian. "I understand. When do we start?" "Thursday." I've already reserved your spot at the treatment center. Thursday. 2 days away. The Tokyo investors were flying in Thursday. The Pacific Resort presentation that Julian had been cultivating for months was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. That evening, Renee sat in their living room overlooking the bay, watching fog roll in as she waited for Julian to come home. She'd rehearsed how to tell him, how to assure him that with treatment, her chances were excellent. How they would get through this together, like every other challenge they'd faced. When he arrived, his tie already loosened, he barely met her eyes. Sorry I'm late. The zoning commission needed additional documentation for the marina project. He headed straight for the bar cart, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch. Julian, she said quietly. I need to talk to you about something important. Can it wait until tomorrow? I've had a hell of a day. No, she said firmly. It can't wait. Something in her tone made him pause, turning to really look at her for the first time since he'd entered. What's wrong? I have leukemia, she said simply, watching his face transform from distraction to shock to something that looked alarmingly like inconvenience. Cancer. He ran a hand through his dark hair. Are you sure? The tests are definitive. I start treatment Thursday. Julian paced their minimalist living room, suddenly agitated. Thursday. The Tokyo investors are flying in Thursday. The Pacific Resort presentation. Julian, she interrupted quietly. I have cancer. He stopped, finally looking at her properly. Of course, I'm sorry. This is unexpected. He set down his glass and came to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. What exactly did the doctor say? Renee explained the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the prognosis. Julian listened, asking questions about timelines and options. But as they discussed treatment options, Renee noticed how Julian kept checking his phone, how his questions focused more on how long she'd be away from work than on her chances of survival. The timing is problematic, he said finally, standing to resume his pacing. We're in the middle of the biggest expansion in company history. The APAC contracts, the Middle East developments. Problematic, she echoed. My cancer is problematic for you. That's not what I meant. But his voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Then what did you mean, Julian? She asked, a dangerous calm settling over her. He sighed, running a hand through his hair again, a gesture she once found endearing but now seemed like a calculated distraction. I meant that we need to approach this strategically. You'll get the best treatment, of course, but we also need to maintain the firm's momentum. We've worked too hard to let everything stall. To let my illness inconvenience your expansion plans, you mean? Renee, be reasonable. I'm just trying to figure out how to handle this situation in a way that protects everything we've built together. Together. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. Is that what we've been doing? Building something together? Because right now it feels like I've been diagnosed with cancer and all you can think about is how it affects the business. Julian's expression hardened slightly. That's not fair. I'm concerned about you. Of course I am. But I also have responsibilities to our investors, our clients, our employees. People are counting on us. On you, you mean? Because clearly, I've just become a liability. You're twisting my words. Look, let's not argue about this tonight. You're upset, understandably so. Let's get some rest, and tomorrow we can figure out how to manage the situation. Manage the situation. As if her cancer were a PR crisis or a construction delay. That night, as Julian slept beside her, Renee stared at the ceiling and faced a truth she'd been avoiding. Somewhere in their journey from partners to power couple, Julian had changed, or perhaps she'd simply stopped seeing him clearly. The man who had once looked at her like she hung the moon now viewed her as an asset on a balance sheet. An asset whose value had suddenly, dramatically decreased. The first round of chemotherapy was brutal. Renee spent days in the hospital, her body at war with itself. The nausea was relentless, the fatigue bone-deep. Her hair, once thick and lustrous, began falling out in clumps, collecting on her pillow like auburn snow. Julian visited briefly between meetings, bringing expensive flowers and distracted kisses. His presence felt obligatory, his mind clearly elsewhere. He'd sit beside her bed, laptop open, answering emails and taking calls in hushed tones. The Melbourne project is facing some regulatory hurdles, he told her during one visit, eyes on his screen rather than her face. Vanessa has been working directly with the local officials to smooth things over. Vanessa again? Renee asked, trying to keep the suspicion from her voice. She's been invaluable these past weeks. Really stepping up to fill the gaps. Fill my gaps, Renee thought but didn't say. Already, after just 2 weeks, she was being replaced. Her designs, her projects, her husband's attention, all transferring to the eager young associate with the perfect blowout and endless energy. How are the Pacific Resort renderings progressing? Renee asked, desperate to maintain some connection to the work that had defined her life. We've made some adjustments. Vanessa suggested simplifying the southern facade to reduce construction costs. The investors loved it. Simplifying. That facade was critical to the passive cooling system. Without the louvers. We found another solution. More traditional, but more cost-effective. More traditional. Less innovative. Less Renee. After 2 weeks of treatment, Renee was discharged to recover at home before her next chemotherapy cycle. Julian had prepared the guest room for her, so you won't be disturbed when I come in late, effectively separating them during her greatest need. That evening, feeling stronger than she had in days, Renee decided to review some work files. Julian had left his laptop at home, and she opened it to access the shared drive where project files were stored. The screen lit up, displaying not the login screen, but Julian's email. He'd forgotten to close it before leaving. Renee was about to navigate away when a message caught her eye. From Vanessa Porter. Subject, last night. Still thinking about last night. You're extraordinary, V. Renee felt the floor drop away beneath her. With trembling fingers, she clicked on the message. Julian. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about the way you looked at me when we were alone in your office. The way your hands felt on my skin. I know we need to be discreet, but I'm counting the hours until we can be alone again. Meet me at the St. Regis after the investor dinner. Room 1217. I'll be waiting. Still thinking about last night. You're extraordinary. V. The message was one of dozens, stretching back months, long before Renee's diagnosis. Each more intimate than the last. Plans for weekends away. References to nights spent together. Complaints about having to maintain appearances. Vanessa's growing role in the firm. In that moment, the narrative of the past few months rewrote itself in Renee's mind. Julian's late nights. The mysterious Melbourne regulatory issues. Vanessa's rapid ascent within the company. The client dinners that Julian came home from smelling of unfamiliar perfume. Renee scrolled through the messages, each one a fresh wound. Until she came to one dated just after her diagnosis. From Julian Hayes. Subject, Re, what now? V. This changes nothing between us. Renee's condition is unfortunate, but it doesn't alter my feelings for you or my plans for us. I just need time to manage the situation appropriately. The firm needs to maintain stability during this transition period. Be patient. When the time is right, we'll be together openly. J. Transition period. As if her illness were merely an inconvenient stepping stone on his path to a new life with Vanessa. Renee closed the laptop, a strange calm settling over her. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it transcended pain. She had trusted Julian with her heart, her career, her future. And he had calculated the return on that investment and found it wanting. That night at dinner, Julian announced he needed to visit potential sites in Napa Valley. Just for the weekend. You'll be fine alone, right? Mrs. Hernandez will check in on you Saturday. Mrs. Hernandez, their housekeeper. That was his solution for his cancer-stricken wife. A monthly employee with a key to their home. Going to Napa with Vanessa? Renee asked calmly, setting down her barely touched glass of water. Julian froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. What are you talking about? I saw the emails, Julian. All of them. How long has it been going on? 6 months. A year. He set down his fork carefully, his face unreadable. You went through my emails. You left them open on your laptop. Don't deflect. How long have you been sleeping with her? Julian sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly as if in relief at no longer having to maintain the pretense. Does it matter? It matters to me. Since the Tokyo conference last fall. It just happened. Things don't just happen, Julian. You made choices. Repeatedly. While I was working 80-hour weeks helping build your empire, you were planning a future with someone else. Our empire, he corrected automatically. And it wasn't planned. It evolved naturally. Like your plan to manage the situation of my cancer. To wait for the transition period to be over before going public with your relationship. Julian had the grace to look uncomfortable. You've taken those comments out of context. Have I? Then please, explain the context in which my husband discusses transitioning away from his sick wife to his young mistress. This isn't productive, Renee. You're upset, understandably so. But working yourself up like this isn't good for your recovery. Don't you dare, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Don't you dare use my illness as a shield for your behavior. Julian stood, tossing his napkin onto the table. I'm not having this conversation now. You need to rest, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. With Vanessa. In room 1217 at the St. Regis. His face hardened. This is exactly why I kept it from you. You're not in a state to handle complex emotional situations right now. I want a divorce, Renee said quietly. His surprise seemed genuine. Because I'm going to Napa. Because you're going with Vanessa. Because when I needed you most, you chose her. Because your pregnant wife with cancer has become an inconvenience to your perfect life. The color drained from Julian's face. Pregnant? That's impossible. Twins, actually, she said with calm she didn't feel. But don't worry. I won't let them interfere with your expansion plans. It was a discovery she'd been sitting with for 3 days. Dr. Fitzgerald had visited her hospital room just before discharge with unexpected news. The preliminary results are encouraging, but we need to adjust your treatment plan, she had said, reviewing Renee's chart. There's a complication. What kind of complication? You're pregnant, Renee. About 6 weeks along. The world had tilted on its axis. Pregnant. During one of their increasingly rare intimate moments, life had found a way despite everything. This changes your treatment options, Dr. Fitzgerald had continued. There are protocols for chemotherapy during pregnancy, but they're complex. And there's more, you're carrying twins. Twins. 2 lives growing inside her while cancer threatened her own. Now, watching Julian process this news, Renee felt a strange clarity descend. This man, this stranger wearing her husband's face, was not the partner she had believed in. Not the father her children deserved. How can you be pregnant? Julian asked, his voice hollow. We've been careful. Not careful enough, apparently. But don't worry. I won't ask you to choose between your mistress and your family. I'm making that choice for you. Julian's expression shifted from shock to calculation, a look Renee recognized from countless negotiations. He was already gaming out scenarios, costs, benefits. Renee, let's not make hasty decisions. We should discuss this rationally. Like you rationally discussed my transition period with Vanessa? No, Julian. I'm done discussing things with you. I want you out of this house tonight. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. Your lawyer? Renee, be reasonable. You're ill. You're pregnant. This is hardly the time to initiate divorce proceedings. On the contrary. Finding out my husband has been cheating on me while I'm fighting cancer seems like exactly the right time to initiate divorce proceedings. At least think about this overnight. We have history. We've built something significant together. We built an architectural firm together, Julian. But apparently we weren't building a life. If you're feeling as stunned as Julian right now, take a moment to hit that like button. Because Renee's story of betrayal is just beginning, and her journey from victim to victor contains lessons about resilience we all need to hear. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Julian's legal team painted Renee as emotionally unstable due to her illness, questioning her judgment and attempting to minimize her contribution to the company's success. They argued that her decision-making capacity was compromised by her medical treatment, that the stress of divorce would endanger her pregnancy and recovery. "They're trying to use your illness against you," said Margaret Winters, the razor-sharp divorce attorney Renee had hired. "Make you look incompetent so they can minimize the settlement." "And are they succeeding?" Renee asked, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Not even close." Margaret's smile was predatory. "I've submitted your complete portfolio from the past 5 years. The company's valuation doubled after your designs entered their catalog. Hayes Architectural Group without Renee Morgan is just another corporate firm with fancy addresses." Julian's team offered a settlement of $300 million, substantial by ordinary standards, but a fraction of Hayes Architectural's true value, which was approaching $3 billion. "Take it," Margaret advised after 3 months of contentious negotiations. "It's enough to secure your future and that of your children. We could fight for more, but that means years of litigation, depositions, stress. Things I can't afford with cancer and a high-risk pregnancy," Renee concluded. "Exactly. And $300 million is not a small consolation prize." Renee accepted the offer. Not because it was fair, but because it was enough to begin what came next. She retreated to a private treatment center in Monterey, a serene coastal property where wealthy patients could recover away from public scrutiny. The facility resembled a luxury resort more than a hospital, with private suites overlooking the Pacific, world-class chefs, and medical staff who specialized in treating high-profile patients with absolute discretion. There, with the Pacific Ocean as witness, Renee fought 2 battles simultaneously, against the cancer consuming her body and for the twins growing inside her. "Most cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy lose weight," Dr. Fitzgerald remarked during one of her weekly visits. "You're the first I've had who's gaining." Renee smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. At 4 months, her pregnancy was becoming visible, a small but definite bump beneath her hospital gown. "I'm eating for 3. Dr. Fitzgerald checked the monitors recording the twins' heartbeats, strong and regular. "They're fighters, just like their mother." "How are my latest scans?" "Encouraging. The modified chemotherapy protocol is working. The cancer cells are responding, and the babies appear unaffected." "And the risks?" Dr. Fitzgerald's expression grew more serious. "Still significant. Premature delivery remains likely. And there's a chance the cancer could accelerate after delivery when we stop the modified treatment and move to more aggressive protocols." Renee nodded, absorbing this information with the same analytical focus she once applied to structural challenges in her designs. "So we're building a bridge that might collapse, but we're doing everything possible to reinforce it." Dr. Fitzgerald smiled at the architectural metaphor. "Exactly. And you're providing the strongest foundation possible. I've never seen someone so determined," Dr. Fitzgerald remarked later to the head nurse. Most people in her position would be focused solely on survival. I'm not fighting for myself anymore, Renee had explained when asked about her extraordinary resilience. I'm fighting for them. Between treatments, Renee began planning her resurrection. While Julian believed she had retreated to lick her wounds, she was systematically studying every aspect of Hayes Architectural Group, their contracts, their investors, their vulnerabilities. From her suite overlooking the Pacific, Renee created a war room. Laptops, financial reports, industry analyses, and architectural journals covered every surface. She hired a team of researchers, financial analysts, and legal experts, all working remotely, all bound by strict confidentiality agreements. Julian has built an empire on brilliant design and ruthless business practices, explained Thomas Chen, the corporate investigator Renee had hired. His voice came clearly through the encrypted video call on her laptop. But he's left a trail of discarded partners, underpaid designers, and broken promises. Show me, Renee said. Thomas's team compiled dossiers on every major player Julian had wronged in his rise to the top. Mia Goldstein, the brilliant structural engineer who developed the cantilevered system that made Hayes's signature suspended spaces possible, pushed out once Julian had secured the patents. Roberto Vasquez, the sustainable materials specialist whose innovations Julian had claimed as his own. Catherine Wu, the investor whose initial funding had saved Hayes from bankruptcy during the recession, only to be diluted out when the company became successful. Renee contacted them all, one by one, building a coalition of the overlooked and underestimated. Not with promises of revenge, but with something more compelling, opportunity. I'm not asking you to help me destroy Hayes Architectural, she told Catherine Wu over tea in her Monterey suite. I'm inviting you to help me transform it. Into what? Catherine asked, skeptical but intrigued. Into the firm it always should have been. One that values innovation over ego. Sustainability over spectacle. True collaboration over exploitation. And Julian? Renee's smile was small but determined. Julian will learn what it feels like to be on the other side of his business practices. As her pregnancy progressed and her body fought the cancer, Renee's mind remained razor-sharp, focused on the intricate chess game she was orchestrating. Each move calculated, each alliance strategic, each decision bringing her closer to reclaiming what was rightfully hers, not just a company, but a future for her children. Her twins, a boy and girl, were born on a stormy December night, 8 months after her diagnosis and 6 months after her divorce was finalized. The delivery was complicated by Renee's weakened condition, but the medical team was prepared. The babies arrived small but perfect, with Julian's dark hair and Renee's amber eyes. What will you name them? Dr. Fitzgerald asked as Renee held them for the first time, one in each arm, their tiny bodies warm against her chest. Renee looked down at her son's serious expression, already so thoughtful, and her daughter's alert eyes taking in everything around her. Philip, after my father, she said, touching her son's tiny hand. And Iris, for new beginnings. As she held these 2 miracle children, born despite cancer, despite betrayal, despite every obstacle. Renee made a silent vow, they would never know abandonment. They would never feel like inconvenient complications in someone else's grand plan. They would grow up knowing they were wanted, cherished, the center of her universe. And their father? He would learn that true legacy isn't built in steel and glass, but in the lives we touch and the love we give. A lesson she would teach him in the most unexpected way. If you're moved by Renee's extraordinary courage in the face of impossible challenges, share this video with someone who needs inspiration today. Because sometimes the people who try to break us become the catalyst for our greatest transformation. 3 weeks after giving birth, Renee received unexpected news. Her post-delivery scans showed no detectable cancer cells. The aggressive chemotherapy that had followed the twins' birth had worked better than anyone anticipated. It's not officially remission yet, Dr. Fitzgerald cautioned. We need at least 6 months of clean scans for that. But it's the best possible outcome we could have hoped for. Renee looked out the window of her Monterey suite, watching waves crash against the cliffs below. For the first time in nearly a year, she allowed herself to truly believe in a future, not just for her children, but for herself. "What now?" Dr. Fitzgerald asked. "Will you return to San Francisco?" Renee shook her head. "No. I'm building something new here. Something that doesn't carry the shadow of betrayal." What Julian didn't know, what no one except her most trusted advisors knew, was that Renee's plan was already in motion. The first pieces were moving into place for a takeover so meticulous, so perfect in its execution, that by the time Julian realized what was happening, it would be too late. The phoenix was preparing to rise from the ashes. And when she spread her wings, the world would never be the same. As Philip and Iris grew from fragile newborns to curious infants, Renee's strength returned as well. Her body, once ravaged by cancer and chemotherapy, began to heal. Her hair grew back, darker and thicker than before. The bruises faded. The bone-deep fatigue receded like an outgoing tide, leaving new energy in its wake. "Your recovery is remarkable," Dr. Fitzgerald said during one of her monthly follow-ups. "6 months ago, we were fighting for your life. Now look at you." Renee sat in the sunlit examination room, Philip asleep in a carrier at her feet while Iris babbled happily in her lap. At 6 months old, the twins were thriving, hitting every developmental milestone with a determination that mirrored their mother's. "I had something worth fighting for," Renee replied, smoothing Iris's dark curls. "And now? What are you fighting for now that you've beaten the cancer?" Renee's smile held a hint of steel. "Justice. But not the kind you might think." The cliffside property she had purchased in Monterey had become both sanctuary and command center. The sprawling modern home, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expansive terraces, offered panoramic views of the Pacific. But behind its serene facade, Renee was orchestrating the most sophisticated corporate takeover in architectural history. Hayes Architectural Group stock has fallen 8% since the Shanghai project delays were announced, reported James Wilson, the financial strategist Renee had hired. His voice came clearly through the speaker system in Renee's home office while she gently rocked Philip's bassinet with her foot. "And the reason for the delays?" she asked, knowing the answer. "Structural issues with the cantilevered section, exactly what you predicted would happen when they simplified your original design." Renee nodded, making a note on her tablet. "And the Dubai project? Cost overruns approaching $30 million. The sustainability systems they eliminated from your design means the building is consuming twice the projected energy. The cooling costs alone are devastating their operating budget. So Julian's short-term cost-cutting is creating long-term disasters." "Precisely. And the board is starting to ask questions." "Perfect timing," Renee said. "Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was the careful acquisition of Hayes Architectural Group stock through a network of shell companies and investment groups. Julian had taken the company public to fund his global expansion, never imagining that his ex-wife was systematically purchasing pieces of his empire. "We need to move carefully," advised Sophia Lin, Renee's corporate attorney. "Buy too much too quickly, and it will trigger SEC reporting requirements that would alert Hayes to what we're doing. How much can we acquire before raising red flags?" Renee asked. 5% through any single entity. "But if we use multiple vehicles? We create a mosaic where no single piece reveals the complete picture," Renee finished. "Exactly as planned." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Renee created 7 different investment entities, each purchasing just under 5% of Hayes Architectural Group's outstanding shares. Crescent Investments, Aurora Capital, Pacific Horizon Partners, Monterey Ventures, Lighthouse Fund, Seaside Acquisitions, Morgan Future Trust, this last one a deliberate breadcrumb, her signature hidden in plain sight for Julian to find too late. Simultaneously, she began cultivating relationships with Hayes's other significant shareholders. Not the major institutional investors who would report any contact directly to Julian, but the mid-sized players who held enough voting rights to matter but felt overlooked by Hayes' management. Julian has always been dismissive of anyone he doesn't see as essential to his vision, Renee explained to Thomas Chen during one of their strategy sessions. It's his blind spot. He discards people once he believes he's extracted their value. Like he did with you, Thomas observed. Yes. And like he did with at least a dozen other key partners and investors. People who now have both motive and opportunity to support new leadership. As her corporate strategy advanced, Renee found her architectural vision evolving as well. During the twins' nap times, she returned to her drafting table, not to design monuments to wealth and power as Hayes Architectural had increasingly focused on, but to create spaces that healed and nurtured. "What are you working on?" asked Dr. Fitzgerald during a house call to check on the twins' development. Renee tilted the drafting table to reveal plans for a building unlike any she'd designed before. A healing center for families affected by cancer. Spaces that support both medical treatment and emotional well-being. Places for children to play while parents receive treatment. Gardens designed for reflection and recovery. Architecture that serves the human spirit at its most vulnerable. Dr. Fitzgerald studied the plans with growing admiration. This is extraordinary. The integration of treatment spaces with family areas, the natural light, the connection to nature. This would transform the patient experience. That's the idea, Renee said softly. To build something that matters in ways Julian never understood. The twins provided both purpose and perspective. In their innocent eyes, Renee saw what truly constituted legacy. Not towers bearing a family name, not magazine covers or industry awards, but the impact we have on individual lives. The love we give. The security we create. Every morning, Renee would take Philip and Iris to the terrace overlooking the ocean. Holding them in her lap, pointing out diving pelicans and leaping dolphins, she would tell them stories, not about their father, not yet, but about the power of perseverance. About phoenixes rising from ashes. About how sometimes losing everything opens the door to gaining something more precious. Your mama used to build pretty buildings, she would tell them as they watched seagulls wheel against the blue sky. Now she's building a better world for you. One where people who break promises don't get to keep the rewards. By the twins' first birthday, Renee controlled 28% of Hayes Architectural Group through her network of investment entities. Not enough for a controlling interest, but a significant foothold. More importantly, she had secured proxy voting agreements from investors representing another 15% of shares, people Julian had alienated over the years who were eager for change at the top. 43% total, James Wilson confirmed during their quarterly strategy review. Combined with the support from 3 board members, we have enough to force a vote of no confidence in current management. And Julian? Renee asked, watching Philip take hesitant steps across the living room floor while Iris observed carefully before attempting to follow her brother. Completely unaware. He's been selling personal shares to fund the London acquisition. His direct ownership is down to 22%. Renee nodded, catching Philip as he tumbled into her arms. And Vanessa Porter? James's expression tightened. Promoted to Chief Creative Officer 6 months ago. They're engaged. The company made the announcement at the same time they revealed the Tokyo Tower project. The Tokyo Tower, a project Renee had initially designed but Julian had claimed as his own after her departure. According to Renee's sources, the final design had eliminated most of her innovative elements, replacing them with flashier but less functional features that photographed well for press releases. Let me guess, they've moved the sustainable systems to Phase 2 of construction. Phase 2 that will never happen, James confirmed. It's all about appearance now. Style over substance. Renee lifted Philip into her arms, nuzzling his neck until he giggled. Well, we're about to teach them both that appearances can be deceiving. As her corporate chess game advanced, Renee maintained absolute privacy regarding her children. The twins were kept completely out of the public eye, their existence known only to her closest circle. No photos on social media. No announcements in society pages. No record connecting them to Julian Hayes. Is it wise to keep them from their father entirely? Dr. Fitzgerald asked during the twins' 18-month checkup. Whatever Julian has done, he is still their biological father. Renee watched as Iris carefully stacked blocks on the examination room floor, her little face intense with concentration. I'm not keeping them from him permanently. I'm waiting until he's ready to see them as people, not as props or inconveniences. And how will you know when that is? I'll know, Renee said simply. A man who abandons his pregnant, cancer-stricken wife for a younger woman doesn't deserve children until he understands what family really means. The annual shareholders meeting of Hayes Architectural Group was scheduled for October 15, exactly 2 years from the day Renee had received her cancer diagnosis. The symmetry wasn't coincidental. She had planned it this way, a perfect circle of karma closing where it had begun. 2 weeks before the meeting, Renee made her final preparations. Her legal team filed the necessary paperwork. Her proxy agreements were confirmed and notarized. The coalition she had built was ready to act in unison. The night before the meeting, Renee stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and strange. Her hair, once long and auburn, was now cut in a sharp bob that accentuated her cheekbones. Her body, once softened by pregnancy and weakened by cancer, had become lean and strong through careful training. Her eyes held a confidence that came not from external validation but from surviving the unsurvivable. "Who are you talking to, Mama?" came a small voice from the doorway. Renee turned to find Iris watching her curiously, teddy bear clutched in one arm. At 18 months, her daughter was already showing signs of the emotional intelligence that would define her, observant, thoughtful, sensitive to nuances most children her age missed completely. "Just myself, sweetheart," Renee said, lifting her daughter into her arms. "Mama has a big day tomorrow." "Going away?" Iris asked, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Just for one day. Grandma Ellen will be here with you and Philip. And when I come back, we'll have a special celebration." "Promise?" "I promise." "And Mama always keeps her promises, doesn't she?" Iris nodded solemnly, resting her head against Renee's shoulder. "Always." Later, after tucking Iris back into bed, Renee checked on Philip. Unlike his sister, he slept sprawled across his crib, limbs flung wide as if claiming as much space as possible. Even in sleep, her son was bold, determined, fearless. "You'll need that courage," she whispered, gently stroking his dark curls. "The world isn't always kind to sensitive souls. But I'll make sure you have the foundation to stand strong." Renee's mother arrived before dawn the next morning, ready to care for the twins during Renee's trip to San Francisco. "Are you sure about this?" Ellen Morgan asked as she helped Renee pack the tailored burgundy suit she'd chosen for the confrontation. "You could send your lawyers, avoid seeing him altogether." "No," Renee said firmly. "Julian needs to see me. To understand exactly who he discarded and what it's going to cost him." Ellen studied her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Just remember what matters most. Those 2 little ones asleep down the hall are your true victory. Everything else is just justice. Justice matters, Mom." "Yes, but revenge can consume you if you're not careful." Renee zipped her suitcase closed with a decisive motion. "This isn't about revenge. It's about building something better from the ashes of what he destroyed. It's about showing my children that their mother stands up against betrayal and creates something stronger in its place." The private helicopter landed on the rooftop of Renee's San Francisco hotel at 8:30 a.m. The Hayes Architectural Group headquarters towered nearby, its distinctive silhouette dominating the skyline, a building Renee had helped design in the early days of their partnership when Julian still valued her vision. In her hotel suite, Renee prepared for battle with methodical precision. The burgundy suit, the color of both power and blood. Subtle makeup that accentuated her features without attempting to hide the new angles cancer and recovery had carved into her face. A single piece of jewelry, not her wedding ring, long since discarded, but a delicate gold pendant containing tiny locks of Philip and Iris's hair, resting just above her heart. At 9:45 a.m., Renee met with her legal team for a final review of the proceedings. Everything is in place, confirmed Sophia Lynn. The proxies are secured. The voting blocks are aligned. Once you call for the vote of no confidence, it will trigger the succession protocol outlined in the corporate bylaws. And Julian's response options? Limited. He can call for a postponement, but without majority support, it will fail. He can challenge the proxy agreements, but we verified every signature. He can attempt to adjourn the meeting, but again, he needs votes he doesn't have. Renee nodded, reviewing the documents one last time. And the press? No leaks. As far as the business world knows, this is a routine annual meeting. Our statement will be released only after the vote is recorded. At 10:55 a.m., Renee entered the Hayes Architectural Group headquarters for the first time in 2 years. The security guard at the reception desk did a double take, clearly recognizing her but uncertain of protocol. Mrs. Hayes, he began. Ms. Morgan, she corrected smoothly. I'm here for the shareholders' meeting. The young man fumbled with his computer. I don't see you on the attendee list. Check under Monterey Ventures. Or perhaps Crescent Investments. Or any of these, she said, sliding a printed list across the desk. His eyes widened as he scanned the names. Yes, I see. Multiple authorized representatives. My apologies, Ms. Morgan. No apology necessary, she replied with a small smile. It's been a while since I've been here. The executive elevator felt smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she simply occupied space differently now. As the floors ticked upward, Renee centered herself, focusing on the calm certainty that had guided her through the past 2 years. This wasn't about hatred or vengeance. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully hers, about building a legacy worthy of her children. The boardroom doors were closed when she arrived, the meeting already in progress. Renee could hear Julian's voice through the polished wood, confident and commanding as he presented the company's annual results. Our Asian markets initiative has been particularly successful, he was saying. Thanks in large part to the strategic insights of our Chief Creative Officer, Vanessa Porter. Renee took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the doors. The sleek boardroom fell silent as she stepped inside. Julian Hayes half rose from his chair at the head of the table, his face draining of color. The woman beside him, young, beautiful, with an engagement ring catching the light, stared in shocked disbelief. Renee. Julian's voice cracked slightly. What are you doing here? She stepped forward, her heels clicking purposefully on the polished floor. I'm here in my capacity as majority shareholder of Hayes Architectural Group. Effective immediately, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in current management. Vanessa Porter recovered first, her perfectly made-up face twisting in disbelief. That's impossible. You have no standing here. Renee's smile was razor-thin as she placed a leather portfolio on the table. Actually, I control 43% of Hayes Architectural shares through various investment entities. Combined with proxy votes from other shareholders, I have more than enough authority to call this vote. The boardroom erupted in confused murmurs. Members flipped through the documents Sophia Lynn was distributing, eyes widening as they confirmed Renee's claims. Julian stared at the papers in front of him, his mind visibly racing to understand how this had happened. Crescent Investments. Pacific Horizon, these are all you. Every single one, Renee confirmed. While you were building glass towers with my designs and planning your future with Ms. Porter, I was quietly becoming you. Share by share, vote by vote. This is insane, Vanessa interjected, her voice rising. The board won't stand for this hostile takeover attempt. It's not hostile when it's supported by a majority of voting shares, Renee replied calmly. And it's not a takeover when I'm simply reclaiming what helped build. We'll challenge this legally, Julian said, his shock giving way to anger. There are regulations about disclosure, about what? Renee interrupted. About acquiring shares through multiple entities. A strategy you personally employed during the Robertson acquisition. Or perhaps about securing proxy votes from investors who feel alienated by current management. Another Julian Hayes specialty. You can't just walk in here after 2 years and think you can take over my company, Julian said, rising to his full height. Your company, Renee echoed, allowing the words to hang in the air. Interesting choice of pronoun. Board member Richard Davis cleared his throat. I think we should proceed with the vote Ms. Morgan has called for. All proper procedures appear to have been followed. I second that motion, added Catherine Wu, one of the investors Renee had cultivated. As a significant shareholder, I want to hear Ms. Morgan's case for new management. The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in corporate warfare. Renee had done her homework thoroughly, every vote was accounted for, every legal requirement met, every possible challenge anticipated and countered. She presented a comprehensive analysis of Hayes Architectural's declining design quality, escalating project failures, and eroding client satisfaction, all tied directly to Julian's leadership decisions after her departure. The Tokyo Tower project alone has required 3 major redesigns due to fundamental flaws in the initial concept, she explained, displaying comparison images on the boardroom screen. Flaws that would never have existed had the original sustainability systems been maintained. Market conditions changed, Julian countered. We adapted. You cut corners, Renee corrected. And now those shortcuts are costing the firm millions in remediation. The very definition of false economy. When the final vote was tallied, the result was decisive. Julian Hayes was removed as CEO of Hayes Architectural Group, effective immediately. Interim leadership would be assumed by the board until a permanent replacement was named, a replacement everyone in the room now understood would be Renee Morgan. As shell-shocked board members filed out, Julian remained seated at the table that was no longer his domain, staring at the voting tally as if willing it to change. How? He asked simply when they were alone, his voice hollow. How did you do this? You taught me well, Renee replied, gathering her papers with the same calm efficiency she had once brought to their partnership. You showed me that in business, sentiment is weakness. That power is the only currency that matters. That people are disposable once they no longer serve your purpose. Julian stood, moving toward her with the predatory grace that had once made her pulse quicken. What do you want, Renee? Money? Revenge? You've destroyed everything I built. I haven't destroyed anything, she corrected. I've simply taken what should have been ours and made it mine. And I intend to rebuild it into something worthy of admiration, not just impressive balance sheets. And what now? You run the company you know nothing about anymore. You haven't designed a building in 2 years. Renee smiled, and it was like watching ice crack. Oh, Julian. That's where you're wrong. I've been designing constantly. Just not the kind of monuments to ego that Hayes has become famous for. What are you talking about? I'm talking about spaces that heal instead of simply impress. Architecture that serves humanity instead of merely housing the privileged. The future of this firm will be built on principles you abandoned long ago. Julian ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that once seemed charming but now appeared merely calculated. This is absurd. You're dismantling decades of reputation based on some idealistic fantasy. No, Renee said quietly. I'm rebuilding a company in the image of what matters most. I'm creating a legacy worthy of my children. The word hit him like a physical blow. Children? Your children, Julian, she said quietly. The twins you chose to never know because you were too busy building an empire to notice what really matters. Julian sank back into his chair, the full weight of her words finally penetrating his armor of self-interest. I have children. Philip and Iris. They're 18 months old now. She removed a small photo from her portfolio and placed it on the table between them, the twins on their birthday, dark curls and amber eyes, laughing as they smashed cake between their tiny fingers. They're extraordinary. Healthy, happy, brilliant. Everything a parent could hope for. Julian stared at the photo, his hand hovering over it but not quite touching, as if afraid it might disappear. Twins, he whispered. A boy and a girl. Yes. Born despite cancer. Despite abandonment. Despite every obstacle you placed in their path before they even took their first breath. Why didn't you tell me? His voice held a note of genuine pain that surprised her. I had a right to know. Did you? Renee asked, her voice hardening slightly. The man who called my cancer problematic timing. Who discussed my transition period with his mistress while I was fighting for my life. That man deserved to know about children he would have seen as further complications. Julian had no answer for this, his eyes fixed on the photo of children who shared his features but whom he had never met. When you're ready to be more than the man who saw family as an inconvenience, Renee said, returning the photo to her portfolio, when you're prepared to earn the right to know them, I'll be waiting. And if I'm ready now? He asked, a desperate edge in his voice. Renee studied him, seeing not contrition but the same calculating opportunism that had defined him for years. You're not. Right now, you're in shock. You've lost your company, your position, your carefully constructed narrative of success. You're looking for something to salvage, not someone to love. She gathered her things, preparing to leave him alone in the boardroom that no longer belonged to him. When you understand what you threw away, not what was taken from you, but what you willingly discarded, then we can discuss your role in their lives. How will I know? How will I contact you? You're a resourceful man, Julian. I'm sure you'll find a way. As Renee walked out of Hayes Architectural Group, soon to be renamed Morgan Design Associates, she felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure in Julian's downfall. Instead, she felt something unexpected, peace. The circle was complete. Justice, not vengeance, had been served. In the elevator down to the lobby, she touched the pendant containing her children's hair, reminding herself what this had all been for. Not to punish Julian, but to create something worthy of Philip and Iris. A company built on integrity instead of exploitation. A legacy of healing, instead of hollow monumentalism. The real work was just beginning. If this story is teaching you something about the quiet power of principled patience, share it with someone who needs to hear that justice often arrives on its own timeline. The most extraordinary part of Renee's journey is still to come. 6 months passed before Renee heard from Julian. 6 months of restructuring Hayes Architectural Group from the inside out. 6 months of restoring the firm's reputation for innovative design. 6 months of balancing corporate leadership with motherhood. The twins continued to thrive, growing from wobbly toddlers into increasingly verbal little people with distinct personalities. Philip was fearless and gregarious, charging into every new experience with boundless enthusiasm. Iris was thoughtful and observant, studying situations carefully before committing herself. Renee had established a pattern that allowed her to be both CEO and mother. 3 days a week in San Francisco at company headquarters, now relocated to a sustainable building she had designed. 4 days at home in Monterey with her children. Video conferences bridged the gaps. The executive team she had assembled understood her priorities and respected the boundaries she established. It's a different kind of architectural firm, business publications noted. One where human considerations take precedence over profit margins, where sustainability isn't a marketing term but a fundamental requirement, where employees are partners rather than assets. The email arrived on a Sunday morning as Renee sat on the terrace watching Philip and Iris build elaborate structures with oversized blocks. The subject line was simple, when you're ready. Renee. I've spent 6 months trying to understand what happened. Not just how you orchestrated the takeover, that I grudgingly admire as a strategic masterpiece, but how I became the kind of man who would abandon his wife when she needed him most. I've been working with a therapist to understand my patterns. The constant need for acquisition and validation. The fear of vulnerability that made me run from your illness rather than face it with you. The hollow ambition that led me to value expansion over connection. I make no excuses for what I did. There are none to make. But I am trying to become someone different. Someone worthy of at least knowing the children I helped create, even if I forfeited any right to be called their father. When and if you believe I've earned that opportunity, I would be grateful for any role you deem appropriate in their lives. Julian. Renee read the message 3 times, searching for the manipulation, the calculated angle, the hidden agenda. Instead, she found something unexpected, what appeared to be genuine remorse and self-reflection. She didn't respond immediately. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be restored through a single well-crafted email. Instead, she began gathering information. Reports from mutual acquaintances about Julian's behavior since the takeover. Financial records showing he had liquidated most of his personal assets. Public records indicating he had established some kind of foundation, though its purpose wasn't clear. He's changed, reported Thomas Chen after a discreet investigation. Living in a modest apartment in Sausalito. Volunteering at a community design center teaching architecture to underprivileged kids. No sign of Vanessa Porter. That engagement was called off within weeks of the takeover. People don't change that dramatically without motivation, Renee observed skeptically. True. But sometimes losing everything provides that motivation. 3 months after Julian's email, Renee finally responded with a simple invitation: coffee at a neutral location, a cafe near the children's playground in Golden Gate Park. She arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the exit. Julian arrived precisely on time, and the changes in him were immediately apparent. The designer suits had been replaced by casual clothes. The practiced confidence had given way to something more tentative. The polished corporate persona had been stripped away, revealing someone who looked both older and somehow more authentic. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, remaining standing until she gestured for him to sit. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Renee admitted, studying him with clinical detachment. "Why should I believe anything has changed, Julian?" He didn't answer immediately, taking time to consider her question rather than launching into a prepared speech. "You shouldn't," he said finally. "Not based on words. Words are easy, and I built a career on making people believe whatever served my interests. Then why are we here? Because I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to demonstrate through actions what I can't prove through words." Renee took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving his face. "Tell me what you've been doing these past 9 months." Julian described his life since the takeover, the initial shock and denial, followed by anger, followed by a long period of painful self-examination. How he had sought therapy to understand the patterns that had defined his life. How he had begun volunteering with at-risk youth, teaching design principles to children who had never been taught to believe in their own creativity. "And the foundation?" Renee asked. "Horizon Healing Spaces. What exactly is that?" Julian looked surprised that she knew about it. "It's a non-profit that designs and builds healing environments for families affected by cancer. Spaces that support both treatment and emotional recovery. I've been funding it with the proceeds from selling most of my personal assets." The description was eerily similar to the designs Renee had been developing during her own recovery. A coincidence that seemed too specific to be accidental. "Did you hack into my files?" she asked sharply. "What?" "No, nothing like that," Julian said, genuine confusion in his expression. "The concept came from my own experience, or lack of experience, I should say. When you were diagnosed, all I could see was how it affected me, my plans, my comfort. I never considered what you were going through, the environments you were healing in." He paused, running a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture now seeming less calculated and more nervous. After I lost everything, I spent a lot of time in hospital waiting rooms supporting a friend through chemo. I saw how dehumanizing those spaces can be. How they add stress instead of relieving it. I realized I had skills that could address that problem. It seemed redemptive somehow. Renee was silent, absorbing this information with the careful analysis she brought to all complex problems. "And what exactly are you hoping for today?" "Just this," Julian said simply. "A conversation. A chance to demonstrate that I'm trying to become someone different. Someone who might someday deserve to know his children. And if I decide that day never comes, then I'll accept that as the consequence of my choices." His voice was steady, his eyes meeting hers directly. "I forfeited any right to them when I abandoned you both. I understand that. But I hope, for their sake more than mine, that you'll consider allowing me some role in their lives. Even if it's just as a family friend who sends birthday cards." Renee thought of Philip and Iris, of the questions they would inevitably ask as they grew older. Of their right to know their father, for better or worse. Of her responsibility to protect them from harm while also allowing them to form their own relationships and judgments. "I need time," she said finally. "And evidence. Not just words and short-term changes, but sustained demonstration that you've truly understood what matters." "I understand," Julian nodded. "Whatever timeline you set, whatever conditions, I'll respect them." As they parted, Renee felt a complex mixture of emotions. Skepticism about Julian's transformation. Caution about allowing him access to her children. But also, unexpectedly, a small seed of hope that perhaps people could change when properly motivated by loss and reflection. 3 more months passed. Renee continued receiving updates about Julian's activities, all consistent with his stated commitment to change. The foundation was gaining recognition for innovative designs. His volunteer work had expanded to include mentoring programs. He had declined lucrative offers to return to commercial architecture, choosing instead to focus on community-centered projects. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 3 years after her cancer diagnosis, Renee made a decision. She sent Julian a text message with an address and a time, but no other details. When he arrived at the Monterey cliffside home, his expression reflected his uncertainty. He stood on the porch clutching a small gift bag, his knuckles white with tension. When Renee opened the door, 2 small figures peered curiously from behind her legs, dark-haired, amber-eyed, watching the stranger with innocent curiosity. "I've come to surrender," Julian said simply. "Surrender what?" Renee asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Everything. My pride, my need for control, my delusion that success could fill the emptiness inside me." He looked at the children, his children, with wonder. "I want to earn the right to know them, to be their father. And if you'll let me, I want to spend whatever time you'll give me proving I can be better than the man who left you." Philip, bold as always, stepped forward. "Who are you?" Julian knelt down to the child's level, his voice gentle. "My name is Julian. I'm an old friend of your mother's." Renee studied Julian, searching for any trace of manipulation or insincerity. What she saw instead was something she'd glimpsed years ago when they first met: vulnerability beneath the armor, possibility behind the ambition. "It won't be easy," she warned. "They don't know you. Trust has to be earned." "I understand." "And the company?" Julian smiled faintly. "Keep it. Build something that matters. I'll find another way to make my mark on the world." The journey back to each other wasn't swift or simple. There were difficult conversations, painful truths, moments when old wounds reopened. Julian began with supervised visits, sitting on the floor with Philip and Iris, learning their personalities, their preferences, their emerging personhoods. Gradually, weekend visits became regular occurrences. The children accepted him with the simple openness of the very young, but Renee's trust was harder earned. Every time Julian arrived when promised, every time he demonstrated genuine interest in the twins' development, every time he supported Renee's parenting decisions instead of challenging them, these small consistencies began building a new foundation between them. "I've been thinking about expanding the foundation's focus," Julian told Renee one evening as they watched the twins playing in the garden. "Moving beyond cancer treatment facilities to include family support centers. Places that offer childcare, counseling, practical assistance for families facing medical crises." "Why?" Renee asked, genuinely curious about his motivation. "Because I want to build something that heals rather than impresses. Something worthy of what I almost lost." He glanced at her, then back to the children. "Something worthy of them." If you've been moved by this story of transformation, comment below about a time when losing something valuable helped you gain something priceless. Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most painful losses. As autumn turned to winter, and winter to spring, the delicate balance between Renee and Julian continued to evolve. The twins, now approaching their third birthday, had incorporated Mr. Julian into their lives with the adaptability of children, accepting his presence without questioning the complicated history that had kept him absent for their early years. "Higher," Philip demanded one sunny afternoon, perched on Julian's shoulders as they explored the tide pools below Renee's cliffside home. "I want to see the starfish." Julian obliged, carefully navigating the slippery rocks while maintaining a secure grip on the boy's legs. "Hold on tight, buddy. These rocks can be tricky." Nearby, Iris crouched beside Renee, intently studying a tiny hermit crab as it emerged from its borrowed shell. "Why does he live in someone else's house?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "Because he needs protection while he grows," Renee explained. "Sometimes we borrow strength from others until we develop our own." Julian caught her eye across the tidal, the metaphor not lost on him. He had been doing precisely that, borrowing the structure of Renee's forgiveness while rebuilding his own moral framework from the ground up. Later, after the twins were asleep, Julian and Renee sat on the terrace overlooking the moonlit ocean. The comfortable silence between them was new, not the tense absence of communication that had marked their final months together, but a quieter understanding that some experiences didn't require words. "I'm establishing a scholarship," Julian said finally. "For young architects focused on healing environments. Fully funded, with mentorship opportunities through the foundation." "That's wonderful," Renee replied. "What prompted this?" "Something Iris said when she was showing me her block tower last week. She told me it was a hospital for sad people to feel better. A 3-year-old instinctively understood what took me decades to grasp. That spaces should serve people, not the other way around." Renee smiled, recognizing her daughter's innate empathy. "She absorbs everything. Sometimes I forget how closely they're watching, how much they're learning from every interaction." "They're extraordinary," Julian said softly. "You've given them such a solid foundation. Such security and confidence. They deserve nothing less." Julian turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Taking my company? Making me face what I'd become?" The question hung between them, weighted with their shared history and separate journeys. Renee considered it carefully, looking past the easy answer to the deeper truth beneath. "The only thing I regret," she said finally, "is that it took nearly losing everything to find what really matters. Not just for you, but for me as well." "What do you mean?" "Before the cancer, before the pregnancy, before your betrayal, I was caught in the same trap you were. Different manifestation, same disease. I measured success in buildings constructed, awards won, magazine covers. I was creating monuments, not homes. Spectacles, not sanctuaries." She gazed out at the ocean, its vast darkness punctuated by moonlight. "Losing everything forced me to rebuild with a clearer understanding of what deserved to be at the foundation." Julian nodded, absorbing her words. "The twins. Yes. But not just them as individuals. What they represent. Connection. Continuity. The understanding that our true legacy isn't what we build in steel and glass, but in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. They sat in silence again, the rhythmic sound of waves against cliffs filling the space between them. When Julian finally spoke, his voice held a gentleness Renée hadn't heard since their earliest days together. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on the possibility that people can change. For allowing me the chance to know Philip and Iris. For building something worthy of continuation rather than destruction." In that moment, looking at the man who had once broken her heart so completely, Renée felt something unexpected, not the renewed passion of their early days, not the bitter resentment of their ending, but something quieter and potentially more enduring. Understanding. Forgiveness. The recognition of growth hard-won through painful self-examination. "The foundation you're creating," she said. "Would you be interested in a partner?" Julian's expression shifted to cautious hope. "What kind of partnership did you have in mind?" "Professional, for now. Morgan Design Associates has resources that could amplify your impact. Our sustainable technologies, our international connections, our implementation teams." "And beyond the professional?" he asked carefully. Renée considered the question. "One step at a time. We're different people now than we were 3 years ago. Better in some ways, more cautious in others. Whatever comes next should be built carefully, with clear-eyed understanding of what we've both survived." Julian nodded, accepting these terms without pushing for more, another sign of how fundamentally he had changed. The old Julian would have pressed his advantage, would have seen her offer as a negotiating position rather than a boundary to be respected. "One step at a time," he agreed. As Philip and Iris grew, so too did the tentative rebuilding between their parents. The foundation Julian had established merged with a division of Morgan Design Associates, creating an international presence dedicated to healing architecture. Julian gradually transitioned from Mr. Julian to Daddy in the twins' lives, earning the title through consistent presence and genuine connection. And Renée, watching the man who had once valued expansion above all else now patiently building block towers with their daughter, found herself considering possibilities she had once thought destroyed beyond repair. The journey wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. Moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. But the foundation they were building, this time with clear intention and hard-won wisdom, was stronger for having been tested, more resilient for having been rebuilt from ashes. 2 years after Julian first appeared on Renée's doorstep, he knelt in the same spot where he had once proposed marriage. This time, there was no diamond ring, no grand gesture, simply a question offered with humility. "I don't deserve a second chance," he said quietly. "But if you're willing, I'd like to build something new with you. Not an empire, not a monument, but a home. A family. Something worthy of the extraordinary children we've created and the lessons we've both learned at such cost." When Renée looked at him, she saw not the ambitious young architect who had swept her off her feet, nor the ruthless CEO who had abandoned her at her most vulnerable. She saw instead a man who had lost everything and found something more valuable in the wreckage: wisdom, humility, and the capacity for genuine change. "Yes," she said simply. "One careful step at a time." When he kissed her, it tasted like forgiveness, like second chances, like a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. In the next room, their children slept peacefully, unaware of the journey their parents had taken to create this moment, this family forged not from obligation or appearance but from choice, from healing, from the understanding that true legacy isn't built in steel and glass but in the connections we fight to preserve. Julian had lost an empire of buildings, but gained something far more enduring, a blueprint for a life worth living, with a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. 5 years passed since Renée and Julian began carefully rebuilding what had once been shattered beyond repair. 5 years of small steps forward, occasional steps back, and the gradual transformation of wounds into wisdom. The cliffside home in Monterey had expanded to accommodate their growing needs. A new wing housed Julia. Foundation offices. While Renee's design studio overlooked the Pacific, its wall of windows capturing the ever-changing seascape that inspired her most innovative work. On a bright spring morning, Renee stood at her drafting table, reviewing plans for their most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive cancer treatment and family support center that would redefine healing environments. The Morgan Hayes Healing Center would integrate cutting-edge medical facilities with spaces designed specifically for patients' families, playrooms for children, quiet reflection gardens, comfortable overnight accommodations, and educational areas where families could learn to navigate the complex journey of serious illness together. What do you think of moving the meditation garden to the eastern exposure? Julian asked, entering her studio with 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one beside her drafting tools, careful not to disturb the precisely arranged papers. Morning light might be more gentle for patients who are sensitive to afternoon heat. Renee considered the suggestion, mentally reconfiguring the space. That would work if we shift the family counseling rooms to the western side. The sound-dampening elements would benefit from the thicker walls we'd need for thermal regulation. Julian nodded, making notes on his tablet. At 45, his dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, and fine lines surrounded his eyes, evidence of both past struggles and present laughter. The arrogant architecture mogul had been replaced by a thoughtful designer who now approached each project with humble consideration of the human lives it would impact. Mama. Daddy. Philip's excited voice echoed through the house moments before he burst into the studio, his school backpack still on his shoulders. At 7 years old, he was all motion and energy, his dark curls perpetually tousled, his amber eyes alight with endless curiosity. Miss Angela says my bridge design might win the state competition. She's never had a second grader qualify before. Julian caught his son mid-leap, swinging him into a hug. That's incredible, buddy. Tell us about your design. As Philip launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his balsa wood bridge that could hold 27 dictionaries, Iris appeared in the doorway. Unlike her brother's dramatic entrance, she arrived quietly, observing the scene before joining it. Her thoughtful nature had only deepened as she grew, her intelligence manifesting in profound questions and careful observations that often startled adults with their insight. I think Philip's bridge worked because he made it flexible instead of rigid, she offered, settling onto the window seat with a book tucked under her arm. The ones that broke were trying too hard not to bend. Renee caught Julian's eye over their children's heads, both recognizing the unintentional wisdom in their daughter's assessment. They had learned the same lesson through their own painful journey, that relationships required flexibility to withstand life's pressures, that rigidity led to breaking rather than bending. That's very perceptive, Iris, Julian said, extending his arm to include her in the family huddle. Sometimes the strongest structures are the ones that know how to give a little. Is that why your buildings don't fall down? Philip asked, immediately practical. Because they're flexible. Exactly, Renee confirmed. We design them to move slightly during earthquakes or strong winds. If they were completely rigid, they'd crack under pressure. Like people, Iris murmured, her gaze meeting her mother's with that eerie perception that sometimes made Renee feel her daughter could see straight through to her soul. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Julian and Renee sat on their bedroom balcony, watching moonlight create a silver path across the dark ocean. These quiet moments had become a cherished ritual, a time to reconnect after busy days of managing their professional commitments and active children. Iris's comment about flexibility today, Julian said, his fingers intertwined with Renee's. It reminded me how close I came to losing everything permanent by holding too tightly to things that were ultimately meaningless. Renee squeezed his hand gently. We've both learned that lesson. I was equally caught up in professional achievement before the diagnosis. Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities rather brutally. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gotten sick? Julian asked, his voice quiet with an old regret that had softened but never completely disappeared. If I hadn't betrayed you? If we had continued on that path we were on? Renee considered the question thoughtfully. It was one they revisited occasionally, not with bitterness but with the perspective of survivors looking back on a narrow escape. "I think we would have built impressive buildings," she said finally. "Won awards, been featured in architectural journals, accumulated wealth. And somewhere along the way, we might have had children who would have been raised primarily by nannies while we chased the next project, the next expansion, the next validation." She turned to face him, the moonlight silvering her features. "We might have had success, but I don't think we would have had fulfillment. Not the kind we found by rebuilding with better priorities." Julian nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "I was thinking today about the old Hayes Architectural Group motto, building monuments that endure. It seems almost laughably hollow now. And yet it wasn't wrong," Renee observed. "We were just mistaken about what constitutes a true monument. Philip and Iris are our most enduring legacy. The lives changed by the healing centers. The young architects mentored through the foundation. Those are monuments that actually matter." Their journey toward this wisdom had not been smooth. The early years of their reconciliation had included painful setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge, when trust newly rebuilt would wobble on its still fragile foundation. There had been heated arguments about parenting approaches, business decisions, and the boundaries of their slowly rekindled relationship. The twins had witnessed some of these struggles, despite their parents' best efforts to shield them. But perhaps more importantly, they had also witnessed the resolution, the careful work of talking through differences, the sincere apologies when mistakes were made, the conscious choice to prioritize connection over being right. "Remember our first joint project presentation?" Julian asked, smiling at the memory. "The Seattle Wellness Center?" Renee groaned. "How could I forget? We disagreed about every aspect of the central atrium. I wanted the healing garden as the focal point. You insisted on the water feature. And we ended up presenting completely different concepts to the board," Julian finished. "They must have thought we were completely dysfunctional." "We were," Renee laughed softly. "But we were learning. And eventually we created something better than either of our original concepts." The Seattle Wellness Center had indeed become their breakthrough project, the first true collaboration of their renewed partnership. The final design had incorporated elements from both their visions, creating a space that flowed naturally between healing gardens and water features, each enhancing the other in a harmonious whole that neither had initially imagined. That project had established the template for their current success. Morgan Hayes Healing Environments had become the premier architectural firm specializing in medical and wellness facilities designed to support both physical and emotional recovery. Their waiting list included hospitals, cancer centers, and rehabilitation facilities around the world, all eager to incorporate their revolutionary approach to healing architecture. "I got a call from Vanessa Porter today," Julian said, his tone carefully neutral. Renee stiffened slightly. Vanessa, Julian's former mistress and nearly his second wife, remained a sensitive topic, though the acute pain of betrayal had long since faded. What did she want? She's heading the architectural department at Rhode Island School of Design now. She's organizing a symposium on sustainable medical facilities and wanted to know if we'd be interested in being keynote speakers. Renee was quiet for a moment, processing her emotions. There had been a time when even hearing Vanessa's name would trigger a cascade of painful memories. Now, it produced only a dull echo of an old wound long healed. "What did you tell her?" she asked finally. "That I'd discuss it with you and let her know. No pressure either way." Renee considered the situation with the measured perspective she had developed through years of rebuilding trust. "It might actually be good for us professionally. RASD has one of the top sustainable architecture programs in the country. And personally." She paused, finding the right words. "Personally, it might represent another kind of healing. A final closure of that chapter." Julian studied her face in the moonlight. "Are you sure? We don't need to do this if it brings up difficult feelings." "I'm sure," Renee said, surprised to find it was true. "We've come too far to let old ghosts haunt us." Besides, she added with a small smile, I think it would be rather poetic justice for her to introduce us as the foremost experts in the field she once dismissed as impractical idealism." Julian laughed softly, bringing her hand to his lips. "Have I mentioned lately how extraordinary you are?" "Not since breakfast," she teased. "I might need a reminder." As he gathered her into his arms, Renee reflected on the long, challenging journey that had brought them to this point. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed them had ultimately become the catalyst for something stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more valuable than what they had initially built together. The next morning brought the organized chaos of a typical school day in the Morgan-Hayes household. Breakfast dishes clattered, backpacks were filled, lunch boxes packed, and permission slips signed amid the twins' excited chatter about upcoming school activities. "Don't forget I need my volcano materials for science club," Philip reminded Julian as he shoveled cereal into his mouth at impressive speed. "Already in the car," Julian assured him. "Along with extra baking soda in case of volcanic emergencies." "And my poetry journal?" Iris asked Renee, her concern evident in the slight furrow between her brows. "Right here, sweetheart," Renee said, placing the leather-bound notebook beside her daughter's plate. "I added some fresh sketching pages in the back like you asked." As Renee watched her family, Julian helping Philip with a stubborn shoelace while simultaneously quizzing Iris on her spelling words, a profound gratitude washed over her. 5 years ago, this ordinary morning scene would have seemed an impossible dream. When she was fighting cancer, pregnant with twins, and reeling from betrayal, the simple joy of family breakfast had felt as distant as another galaxy. Later that day, as Renee reviewed construction documents for the healing center, her assistant interrupted with news that would once again test the strength of their carefully rebuilt foundation. "Ms. Morgan, there's a Ms. Porter here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Renee felt a momentary tightening in her chest, the body's instinctive response to a name associated with past pain. She took a deep breath, centering herself. "Show her in, please." Vanessa Porter had changed in the 7 years since Renee had last seen her in that fateful boardroom confrontation. The ambitious young associate had matured into a polished professional, her former model-like beauty now tempered with a more serious demeanor. As she entered Renee's office, her confidence appeared slightly forced, her posture suggesting someone bracing for a difficult encounter. "Renee," she said formally. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "I admit I'm curious about what brings you to Monterey unannounced," Renee replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her tone was professional but not hostile. Vanessa sat, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "I could have waited until the symposium next month, but that felt cowardly. I wanted to speak with you privately before we're forced to interact professionally." "About what, exactly?" Vanessa met her gaze directly. "I owe you an apology. One that's 7 years overdue." Of all the scenarios Renee had briefly imagined when hearing Vanessa was in her office, this had not been among them. She remained silent, allowing the other woman space to continue. "What I did, becoming involved with Julian while he was married to you, especially during your illness, was unforgivable," Vanessa continued. "I told myself stories to justify it. That your marriage was already failing. That Julian wasn't happy. That we had a special connection that transcended normal boundaries." She shook her head, genuine regret evident in her expression. "But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was ambitious. Julian represented access to opportunities one wanted. I convinced myself that the professional and personal relationships were separate, but they weren't. I used him, and I allowed him to use me, and we both participated in something deeply wrong." Renee absorbed these words, examining her own emotional response with the self-awareness she had developed through years of healing. There was surprise at Vanessa's candor, a faint echo of old pain, but most surprisingly, a sense of compassion for the younger woman who had been caught in Julian's orbit during his most destructive period. "Why tell me this now?" Renee asked. Vanessa's composed facade cracked slightly. "Because I'm building something meaningful at RSD, a program that teaches not just design skills but ethical professional practice. And I can't stand in front of students talking about integrity while this unacknowledged wrong sits between us. She took a deep breath. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I participated in, and that I'm truly sorry for the pain it caused. Renee was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. 7 years ago, she might have dismissed such an apology as self-serving or insufficient. But time and perspective had taught her the value of grace, not for the other person's benefit, but for her own peace. Thank you for your honesty, she said finally. What happened 7 years ago shaped all of our lives in ways none of us could have anticipated. Julian and I have worked hard to build something new from those ashes. I hope you found your own path forward as well. Vanessa nodded, visible relief softening her features. I have. It took losing everything, my reputation, my position, my self-respect, to understand what actually matters. Your work with healing environments has been inspiring. That's actually why I wanted you both for the symposium. Your approach is transforming how we think about the intersection of design and wellness. As the conversation shifted to professional matters, Renee felt another piece of her past find proper closure. Not through dramatic confrontation or lingering resentment, but through the quiet recognition that healing happened in unexpected ways, often through the very people who had once caused harm. That evening, as she related the surprising encounter to Julian, his reaction reflected his own growth. I've never properly apologized to her either, he admitted. I was so focused on making amends to you and the children that I conveniently ignored my responsibility for leading her into that situation. I was her boss, in a position of power. Whatever her motivations, I created the circumstances that made it possible. Renee studied him thoughtfully. Maybe the symposium offers an opportunity for multiple kinds of healing. The following weeks brought final preparations for the Morgan Hayes Healing Center groundbreaking ceremony. What had begun as a conceptual project 5 years earlier was finally becoming reality. A comprehensive facility that would serve as both a functional medical center and a showcase for their philosophy of healing environments. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, the California sun warming the expansive property where construction would soon begin. The event had drawn healthcare professionals, designers, and media from across the country, all eager to witness the launch of what industry publications were already calling the future of integrated healing architecture. As Renee prepared to address the gathered crowd, she caught sight of Julian kneeling between Philip and Iris in the front row, adjusting their clothes and whispering something that made them both giggle. The twins, now 7, were dressed in their professional clothes, as they called them, Philip in a miniature blazer he insisted on wearing despite the warm weather, and Iris in a flowered dress with a small sketchbook clutched in her hands. Ready? Julian asked, joining her at the podium, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture of support that had become natural again over the years. Renee nodded, surveying the crowd. Among the attendees, she recognized faces from various chapters of their story. Dr. Fitzgerald, who had guided her through cancer treatment and the twins' birth. Catherine Wu, whose early investment had helped launch their Healing Environments initiative. Even Vanessa Porter, sitting quietly toward the back, representing RISD's interest in the innovative project. Welcome, Renee began, her voice strong and clear. 7 years ago, I received a diagnosis that changed everything. Acute myeloid leukemia, 3 words that altered the trajectory of my life and career in ways I could never have imagined. She paused, making eye contact with individuals throughout the audience. I experienced firsthand how profoundly our physical environments affect our healing journey. The sterile hospital rooms that felt more like prisons than places of recovery. The waiting areas that amplified anxiety instead of alleviating it. The separation of patients from the natural world and from the family connections that give healing its purpose. Julian stepped forward. What began as a personal epiphany evolved into a professional mission. The Morgan Hayes Healing Center represents everything we've learned about creating spaces that serve the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, during their most vulnerable moments. The ceremony continued with presentations detailing the center's innovative features. The integration of nature throughout the design. The family accommodations that would allow loved ones to remain close during extended treatments. The research facilities dedicated to studying how architectural elements affect recovery outcomes. When it was time for the ceremonial groundbreaking, Julian surprised the audience by inviting Philip and Iris to join them. "Our children are the heart of this project," he explained as the twins stepped forward, beaming with importance. "They remind us daily why this work matters, because every patient is someone's loved one, someone's whole world. When we design healing spaces, we're not just creating buildings, we're creating sanctuaries for families during their most challenging moments." Philip and Iris each took a small shovel, flanked by their parents, and together the family turned the first earth on what would become their greatest professional collaboration. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, not just of a prestigious architectural project beginning, but of a family who had transformed personal tragedy into purpose. Later, as attendees mingled during the reception, Dr. Fitzgerald approached Renee with a warm embrace. "If someone had told me 7 years ago that this would be the outcome of your diagnosis, I would never have believed it," she said, gesturing toward the architectural models displaying the healing center plans. "Neither would I," Renee admitted. "When you first told me I had leukemia, my biggest fear was how it would affect my career. I couldn't imagine that it would actually redirect my career towards something infinitely more meaningful." "And your family," Dr. Fitzgerald added, watching Julian in animated conversation with a group of healthcare administrators. Philip perched on his shoulders to see over the crowd. "That's the most remarkable healing of all." Renee followed her gaze, warmth filling her chest at the sight of her family. "We had to completely rebuild from the foundation. There were times I didn't think it was possible. The strongest structures often rise from the most catastrophic collapses," Dr. Fitzgerald observed. "Something I believe both you and Julian understand better than most. If this story is showing you how tragedy can be transformed into purpose, take a moment to like and share it with someone who might need this message today. Sometimes our greatest challenges become the doorways to our most meaningful contributions." As the Morgan Hayes Healing Center took shape over the next 18 months, so too did the evolution of their family. The twins entered 3rd grade, their distinct personalities continuing to develop in fascinating ways. Philip's natural exuberance found focus in science and engineering, his bedroom transforming into a laboratory of ongoing experiments and half-built inventions. Iris developed a passion for poetry and art, her sensitive nature expressing itself through words and images that captured the beauty she observed in ordinary moments. Julian and Renee found themselves navigating the complex terrain of elementary school social dynamics, homework struggles, and the beginnings of their children's independence, all while managing their expanding professional responsibilities. "I never imagined I'd be more nervous about a 3rd-grade science fair than a presentation to international investors," Julian confessed one evening as he helped Philip troubleshoot a malfunctioning solar panel for his project. "Welcome to parenthood," Renee laughed, looking up from where she was helping Iris prepare her visual poetry display. "Where the stakes feel infinitely higher because they're measured in a child's smile or tears." Their professional partnership had settled into a rhythm that capitalized on their complementary strengths. Renee's innovative design vision balanced by Julian's practical implementation expertise. Their firm had grown selectively, maintaining quality over quantity, turning down lucrative projects that didn't align with their healing environment's mission. The most significant test of their rebuilt relationship came unexpectedly, nearly 8 years after Renee's initial diagnosis. What began as routine follow-up scans, performed annually since her remission, revealed concerning shadows that required further investigation. "It's likely nothing," Dr. Fitzgerald assured her during the ultrasound. "Given your history, we're just being extra cautious." But the additional tests confirmed what Renee had feared from the moment she saw the technician's concerned expression. The leukemia had returned, not as aggressive as the original diagnosis, but present nonetheless. Requiring treatment. Requiring another fight. Sitting in Dr. Fitzgerald's office, holding the results, Renee felt a peculiar calm. Not the shocked numbness of her first diagnosis, but the centered clarity of someone who had walked this path before. "How do you want to handle this?" Dr. Fitzgerald asked gently. "Honestly," Renee replied. "Directly. With Julian by my side this time." When she returned home that afternoon, Julian was in the backyard with the twins, helping them construct an elaborate fairy garden in a shaded corner near the cliff edge. Iris was carefully arranging tiny furniture made from twigs and acorn caps, while Philip engineered a working waterfall using an old aquarium pump. Renee paused at the patio door, watching this tableau of ordinary family happiness. 8 years ago, facing cancer had meant facing it essentially alone, carrying the additional burden of betrayal alongside the physical challenges of treatment. Now, looking at Julian's patient interaction with their children, she felt something she hadn't expected: gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, difficult as it had been. "Julian," she called softly. "Can we talk for a minute?" He must have heard something in her voice, because he immediately looked up, his expression shifting from relaxed to concerned. "Sure. Kids, keep working on the waterfall system. I'll be right back." In their bedroom, Renee handed him the medical report without preamble. "The leukemia's back." Julian's face paled as he scanned the documents, his hands trembling slightly. "How bad?" "Not as advanced as last time. Caught earlier. Good prognosis with treatment." "Treatment," he repeated, the word hanging between them, laden with memories of what that had entailed before. The sickness, the weakness, the grueling recovery. "Yes. Starting next week." Julian set the papers aside and took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me what you need. Tell me how to support you. I won't fail you this time, Renee." The simple sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "Just be here," she said quietly. "That's all I needed last time. That's all I need now. I'm not going anywhere," he promised, pulling her into his arms. "We face this together. All of us." That evening, they gathered the twins in the living room for a family meeting. At 8 years old, they were old enough to understand serious conversations, but young enough to need careful explanation. "Remember how we told you that Mama was very sick before you were born?" Renee began, sitting on the coffee table facing them on the sofa. Philip nodded vigorously. "You had cancer in your blood, but you beat it up." "That's right," Renee smiled at his characterization. "But sometimes, even when you think you've beaten something completely, little bits of it can hide and come back later. The doctors found some cancer cells again, so I'm going to need more treatment." Iris's eyes filled with tears, her sensitive nature immediately grasping the implications. "Are you going to die?" Julian moved to sit beside the children, putting an arm around each of them. "The doctors don't think so, sweetheart. They caught it very early this time, and Mama is much stronger than she was before. But she will need our help," he continued. "The medicine that fights cancer is very strong, and it will make Mama tired sometimes. She might not feel well enough to do all the things she normally does. So we're going to be her support team. Like a family construction crew." Philip suggested, already thinking in building metaphors from his exposure to their work. "Exactly like that," Renee confirmed, touching his cheek affectionately. "We're building health instead of buildings." Over the following months, as Renee underwent treatment, the family adapted to new rhythms. Julian restructured his work schedule to be present for all medical appointments and to manage the household when Renee's energy was depleted. The twins took on age-appropriate responsibilities, finding ways to support their mother that touched her deeply, Philip creating a science experiment chart to track her medication schedule, Iris writing poems and drawing pictures that she taped to Renee's bedroom walls to give her something beautiful to look at during difficult days. What struck Renee most profoundly during this second cancer journey was the difference between fighting illness in isolation versus fighting it surrounded by love. The physical challenges remained difficult, the nausea, the bone-deep fatigue, the temporary hair loss, but the emotional landscape was transformed by Julian's unwavering presence and the twins' innocent determination to help. I never thought I'd say this, Renee admitted to Dr. Fitzgerald during a treatment session, but in some ways, this experience has been a gift. How so? The doctor asked, checking her foreline. The first time, cancer showed me what was broken in my life, the facade of partnership that crumbled under pressure. This time, it's showing me what's been rebuilt, stronger than before. She glanced toward the waiting room where Julian sat with the twins, helping them with homework while waiting for her treatment to conclude. I wouldn't wish this disease on anyone, but I can't deny that it's taught me what truly matters. 6 months later, Renee received the news they had all been hoping for, complete remission once again. The family celebrated with a quiet dinner on their terrace, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and pink. I have something for everyone, Julian announced after dessert, disappearing into the house and returning with 3 small wrapped packages. Presents. Philip bounced in his seat. But it's not our birthday. Some gifts don't need a special occasion, Julian explained, distributing the boxes. Just a special meaning. Renee opened hers first, a delicate gold compass pendant, its needle pointing steadfastly north. It's beautiful, she said, running her finger over the intricate design. Because you've always been our true north, Julian explained. Even when I lost my way completely, you never lost yours. The twins eagerly opened their packages next. For Philip, a small brass telescope that extended to reveal careful engravings along its length. For Iris, a silver locket containing a tiny watercolor of the ocean view from their home. The telescope is to remind you to always look beyond what's right in front of you, Julian told his son. To see possibilities others might miss. Turning to Iris, he gently opened her locket. And this is to remind you that home is always with you, no matter where life takes you. Renee watched this scene with a full heart, recognizing the thoughtfulness behind each gift. Julian had once expressed love through expensive presents that demonstrated wealth rather than understanding. These carefully chosen items reflected how deeply he now saw each family member as an individual, valued for their unique qualities. I have a gift too, Renee said, retrieving an envelope from inside the house. It's for all of us. Inside was a deed to a property near the healing center, 10 acres of land with an old farmhouse in need of renovation. What is this? Julian asked, studying the documents. The next phase, Renee explained. A residence facility for families of long-term patients. A place where they can stay together during extended treatments, with spaces designed specifically for children to process what's happening to their loved ones. The twins leaned in, examining the property photos with interest. Can we help design it? Iris asked, already envisioning spaces she would create. It has a pond. Philip noted excitedly. Can we put a science lab for kids there? Julian met Renee's eyes over their children's heads, understanding the deeper significance of this project. You want to create what you wished had existed when you were going through treatment with the twins. She nodded. A place where families facing medical crises don't have to fragment. Where children can be supported while their parents undergo treatment. Where healing happens for everyone involved, not just the patient. It's perfect, Julian said softly. The completion of the circle. As the family discussed possibilities for the new project, Renee reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. The betrayal that had once shattered her world had ultimately led to its rebuilding with stronger foundations. The cancer that had threatened her life had redirected it toward deeper purpose. We should put in a garden like ours, Iris was saying, her creative mind already planning. So the kids can build fairy houses when they're sad. And a workshop where they can invent things, Philip added. Sometimes building stuff helps you not worry so much. Julian wrapped an arm around Renee's shoulders as they listened to their children's ideas. From the mouths of babes, he murmured. They understand healing spaces instinctively. They understand because they've lived it, Renee replied. They've watched us rebuild everything from the ground up, our relationship, our careers, our purpose. They know that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about creating environments where broken things can become whole again. The Family Residence Center, as it came to be called, opened 2 years later. Its design represented the culmination of everything Julian and Renee had learned, both professionally and personally, about creating spaces that facilitated healing on multiple levels. The children's input had been incorporated throughout, from Philip's science discovery room to Iris's art therapy studio and storytelling nook. On the day of the opening ceremony, the Morganhays family stood together at the entrance. The twins, now 10, had matured into thoughtful preteens with their own perspectives on their family's work. Julian and Renee, partners in every sense of the word, exchanged a look of quiet pride as they prepared to welcome the first families who would benefit from this space. Before we cut the ribbon, Renee addressed the gathered crowd, "I want to share something personal. 11 years ago, I received a cancer diagnosis that should have destroyed my life. In many ways, it did destroy the life I had built until that point, my marriage, my career path, my sense of security." She glanced at Julian, who nodded encouragingly. What I couldn't see then was that sometimes things need to be completely dismantled before they can be rebuilt properly. Sometimes the foundation itself is flawed and needs to be replaced before anything stable can rise. Julian stepped forward to continue. "What Renee and I have learned through personal and professional rebuilding is that true healing requires more than medical intervention. It requires supportive environments, meaningful connections, and the space to reimagine what comes next. This center," he gestured to the building behind them, "represents our belief that families should not have to fragment during medical crises. That children should not be sidelined during a parent's illness. That healing happens most completely when it happens collectively." As they cut the ribbon together, all 4 hands on the ceremonial scissors, Renee felt the perfection of this moment. Not because everything was perfect, life never was. But because they had transformed their deepest wounds into sources of healing for others. Because they had shown their children that broken things could be rebuilt stronger than before. Because they had discovered, through tremendous pain and painstaking reconstruction, what truly constituted an enduring legacy. Later that evening, as the family walked along their cliffside path watching stars emerge over the Pacific, Iris slipped her hand into Renee's. "I'm going to be an architect too," she announced quietly. "But I want to design places that help people heal from other kinds of hurts. Not just physical ones." "What kinds of hurts, sweetheart?" Renee asked. Iris considered this carefully before answering. "The kind that happen when people lose something important. Or when they feel alone. Or when they think something broken can never be fixed." Renee exchanged a glance with Julian, both recognizing their own journey in their daughter's ambition. "I think that's the most important kind of architecture there is," Julian told her, his voice gentle with understanding. "Building spaces where broken hearts can find their way home." As the twins ran ahead to examine tide pools in the fading light, Julian drew Renee close. "Did you ever imagine, when you were fighting for your life all those years ago, that this would be the outcome? That your greatest trial would become your greatest purpose?" Renee watched their children silhouetted against the sunset, their heads bent together over some fascinating discovery. "Never," she admitted. "I was just trying to survive. To protect our babies. To find some kind of justice in a situation that felt completely unjust. And now I understand that the true justice wasn't in taking your company or making you face consequences. It was in the rebuilding that came after. In creating something meaningful from something broken." She turned to face him fully. "In allowing transformation for both of us." Julian brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still capable of sending warmth through her after all these years. "You know what architectural principle this reminds me of?" "Tell me." "Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The philosophy that something can be more beautiful for having been broken, that the history of damage and repair becomes part of the object's story rather than something to disguise." Renee smiled, recognizing the truth in this comparison. Their relationship, like their family, their careers, their purpose, had been shattered and reconstructed with the gold of hard-earned wisdom running through every repaired crack. "I think that's what healing really means," she said softly. "Not returning to what was before, but creating something stronger and more beautiful because of what was broken." As they walked hand in hand toward their children, the setting sun casting long shadows across the cliff path, Renee reflected on the extraordinary blueprint that grief and healing had drawn for their lives. From devastating diagnosis to triumphant rebuilding. From betrayal to reconciliation. From broken dreams to more meaningful ones. The true masterpiece wasn't the buildings they had designed, impressive as those were. It was the life they had reconstructed from the ashes of the old one. A life built on stronger foundations. A life designed around what truly mattered. A blueprint for healing that would endure long after they were gone, living on through their children and through the countless families who would find strength within the healing spaces they had created. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of resilience, redemption, and the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to transform tragedy into purpose. Share in the comments below how you've experienced rebuilding in your own life, because your story of rising from ashes might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, the most beautiful masterpieces often begin with a blank canvas created by loss. It's what we choose to build on that empty space that defines our legacy. Thank you for joining us on this journey of healing and hope. Until next time, look for the gold in your broken places, that's where the light gets in.